Thank you everyone for joining us today. Very excited to have my panelists with us today. And so I'd like to thank Marni, Frith, Ashley, Krishna, and Avi for joining us on stage today. We've got people coming from around the world as we were just discussing, and so I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. It seems to be a very relevant conversation in some ways. As we know, some of the largest education and EdTech companies are actually coming from outside the US, from China, from India, from Brazil. And now there's this question around, and a lot of those were built for local market. But the question is now, how do we discuss whether education and EdTech can be built anywhere for any student around the world? And I think that's the conversation we want to have here. Obviously, this is all under the backdrop of many disruptive events that have happened over the last couple of years, from COVID, political instability, the revolution of AI, and economic crises. And so I think those have all had impacts on education and globally. And so in this moment, in this window of kind of a disruptive moment, we want to figure out what role education is going to play. And there's this concept that the education system from the last year is not going to be the one that is going to work in this new environment. And so the time is really now to focus on the learner and each individual learner. So I want to start, Avi, I'll start with you just to talk about kind of in this time of COVID that has affected the world, how do you believe it's impacted the acceleration of globalization and access to EdTech?
Well, I think COVID, first of all, generated sort of a shared experience that everyone in the world shared in the same time, more or less the same challenges. And when the demand was aligned, I think also the access to suppliers outside your territory became to be relevant. So I think in those two senses, like first of all, sharing the same experience, and second, having the same kind of needs generated sort of alignment that really enabled to see more access to solution outside your territory. I can give some more color about the first week of the COVID. I had a conference call with Japan, with the Ministry of Economy, that wanted to see what we do in Israel in this sense. And I could not imagine this kind of sense of urgency in other contexts.
Any other perspectives from any of the other panelists on this?
So I want to add this. If you, this whole concept of you can build it anywhere and you can build it for anyone, it always existed in many other industries. Like software is a great example. Like some of the largest software companies started here in US and we pretty much use it all across the world, right? So this phenomena that you can build it anywhere and you can sell it anywhere and you can understand a requirement has only become stronger as technology has become more prevalent in our life. We know what's happening in different parts of the world. Education in particular, if you look at like this whole skills that are required to be successful at workplace, the kind of skills that are required in Bangalore, Boston, or Sao Paulo, it's all same. People want to learn Java, they want to learn data, they want to learn cyber, and so on. And of course, education is much more complex than just this reskilling and upskilling for workforce. There are a lot of different components like K-12. Then there are a lot of country-specific nuances. There are religious nuances that many countries are very, very particular about. So of course that requires local touch. But this concept is now, I think, pretty well established that you can build it anywhere, you can sell it anywhere. The question is that how do we make it more real so that while you are building it remotely anywhere, but it appears as it is built for them and it is built locally for them, right?
Ashley, do you have something to say?
I was just going to respond, but I think you have that question.
Well, so I was going to ask, and I was going to ask Marni to start with this, but after COVID accelerated the globalization process, how can global EdTech platforms still balance the need for localization and ensuring that their solutions are tailored to the unique cultural and linguistic needs of the learners in different countries while leveraging the benefits of globalization?
Yeah, sure. So one quick response to what was just said. I think we, post-COVID, a couple of things have happened that we have to be, as we embark on a more global future, is one, educational institutions across the globe really had to engage in at least a minimal amount of digital disruption of the way that they serve students, and through that, I think that forced experience have become a little bit more knowledgeable and savvy and maybe even ambitious on digital transformation fronts. I think we definitely saw that happening more or less across the globe. They have become more learner-centered in that work because now with these new digital approaches to delivering learning, they're like, oh yeah, and we could serve working adult learners, or we could serve, so there's a lot of ahas around learner-centeredness, I think, in our educational institutions. And then learners themselves, I think, have been radically transformed from this experience because, look, we're like on a massive uncertainty curve, all of us. Right, so COVID hit, and we've all lost some certainty in the world around us. We don't know what's going to happen next. There's been economic disruption. There's ChatGPT and generative AI, and so this uncertainty curve is, it's probably the steepest that it's ever been for us in modern times. In good ways, there's a lot of opportunity associated with that uncertainty, and in ways that are really, really unsettling. So we've seen a lot of change since COVID, and Coursera, of course, has been right in the middle of that change, supporting both university as well as industry partners to figure out, okay, what's next? When it comes to globalization, some of the things we're really bearing down on is new machine learning powered capabilities around translation that is not just Google Translate, but that is really attending to the translation needs from a language perspective that we really need to have in place for the different regions where we operate, which is everywhere. And then related to that, thinking through how generative AI coaches that could operate in multiple languages, as well as generative AI content that could help us truly localize content for particular geos or particular learner populations or both, is another area that we're moving into because we know, yes, there is this consistent demand for the same skills across geos, and that's remarkable. That's really remarkable. But at the same time, the context of that demand, the learner profile that is after those skills, the context in which they're learning those skills, the economies in which they're trying to gain value from those skills, they're radically different from geo to geo, and we can't just move forward blithely without recognizing that.
Absolutely. Ashley, do you want to?
Yeah, and I would agree with that each geography has very unique needs, and our learners ask for different things. So, for instance, in Emeritus, we have local offices around the world. So we have a China office, we have a South Asia office, East Asia, Middle East, Europe, US, LATAM. And each office creates unique experiences for our learners. So that's a delivery, that's a design, because their needs are different. There are some universal conditions that need to be met across all geographies. But for instance, with our India students, they really like sync online, right? So that's really important to them. And in LATAM, they're really hungry for leadership. So we see different needs and we respond to that uniquely in the different geographies.
And how are each of you figuring out what are the commonalities that really are commonalities, and it's not just an assumption that they're commonalities, and what is really needed in local market? How do you figure that out? How do you execute on that then?
Yeah, I think the two commonalities, or there's a couple of commonalities. The first is that every learner deserves to know exactly what they're going to learn and what is their pathway, and so a lot of clarity on what are they going to get out of it. And our learners are 15 years plus of experience. So they're professionals and their time is short. They need to know exactly what they're going to get out of it, tangible outcomes. So that's the first. And second, every learner deserves the best support. They deserve appreciation and encouragement. And that is where that high touch comes in, which with our course leaders, they provide that. Our graders, it's wonderful to see the comments that our learners give to our graders. They're like, oh, thank you so much for helping me. You've made my day. Or, you know, I couldn't have got through this course without you. So it's that human touch that's so critical. And we'll talk about that.
We will talk
with
about
the
this in a
AI.
minute, yeah.
But just real quickly to your question, I think that what's really important and the accountability of a global platform is to have the data infrastructure to actually understand, and the research infrastructure to actually understand what's going on in local regional economies and in the educational ecosystems in those geos, so that you can figure out the best way to synergistically fit into the problem to be solved. So one of the things that we're really investing in and excited about is we do have research teams who are looking at geolocated acute workforce shortages and skills shortages, as well as qualitative research teams who are doing surveying to sort of talk to learners and talk to employers in those geos, so that we can understand, you know, how does what we offer as a global platform fit in? Where does it fit in? What are the strategic partnerships we need in that region to fit in and be a plus, not just another player, but like a value add to that problem space?
So I'm going to switch topics, but before I do, I just wanted to see if Krishna, Avi, or Frith, you have any comments on the topic of this kind of globalization of a platform per se, but really localized solutions.
Well, like quick two observations about the communalities and the gap. I think as to the communalities, I think there is another very important aspect, which is all the social networks culture. And most of our users, no matter where they're based, probably are using Instagram or Snapchat, depends on the geography, or Facebook, depends on the age. And this generates sort of a common language. So this is for the one hand. From the other hand, there's some deep cultural gaps that you cannot identify without really having boots on the ground. I can give a very concrete example. We work a lot with the Bedouin community, which is a nomad culture. We did some kind of piloting a startup that does self-learning support. Part of the app was to report about the way I progress. And the Bedouin students did not report anything during the process, and we were sure that they didn't learn anything. But it turns out that in their culture, the reporting was really, really difficult for them, like sharing this kind of thing, although they did the whole thing, but they didn't want to be part of this game of reporting. So I think it's very fine line to identify the communalities, but also to be aware to those deep gaps that in the end of the day generate or don't generate learning.
Yeah, I also want to add one perspective here, that if you build something that is very, very localized for a very local market, maybe you will end up building a great solution for that local market. But unfortunately, that doesn't make a great business, because business has to be scalable enough so that you can spend in R&D and you can like maybe outspend others and emerge as a winner. So this global versus local has been a challenge in all the businesses. The way we look at Simplilearn is that, okay, if I define my product architecture, what all I can replace? Like, for example, one of the things that we observed is that brand matters. So maybe there is a brand here in US that resonates very well in that local market, but the same curriculum, if you offer against a local brand in some other part of the world, it resonates better. So I think, so that's one example. And similarly, there are like language translations. Then there are, especially like what Ashley told about this, Asian students preferring live interactive classes, whereas the American students, they want on-demand at their own convenience. So these are other variations of the localization. But of course, I think most players always try to figure it out, that how do I put it in a template? 5 things can be all across global, and what 5 things I can change. But unfortunately, as a business, I would like everything to be same, simple.
Of course.
But the reality is that the world doesn't work that way, right?
That's right. Well, let's change to another topic, which is everyone's discussing, is generative AI, right? And what's the impact on education? And so it seems that generative AI is changing EdTech in 2 ways: productivity applications, as you mentioned, Marni, and massive personalization of the learning experience. So Frith, let me turn to you and ask you about this. Do you agree with that idea? And how does AI open the door to new types of assessments, for example, also that are more interesting than, say, current methods we discussed, essays, and we have a company that actually, in Brazil, there's a standardized exam, and there's an essay part of that exam. And to educate students, they do practice essays. But what's happening now is generative AI is writing the essays, and from our company, generative AI is grading the essays. So it doesn't really seem to do much. So from an assessment perspective and other areas, how do you see generative AI impacting?
Well, so I'm actually going to leave the assessment question to somebody else, but I'm very interested in the generative AI and personalization as it relates to this global versus local question. And I think it's a challenge of blending. So I come from the perspective of running a startup. I guess we're growth stage now. Are we growth stage now?
Sure.
We have customers in Europe and Asia, and Japan is our single biggest market, and it's mostly corporates. And what we found was that localizing in the sense of translation. Obviously, we translated our platform booking and payment information into Japanese. We translated our website and our sales materials. We've been talking about build it anywhere, sell it anywhere. Sometimes it comes down to a question of how much do you want to sell? And if you really want to sell a lot, we found that it was essential to get closer to our customers, not only to localize in the language sense, but we actually decided to move our leadership team to Japan so that there is both more physical proximity for us to be closely listening to our customers' needs and building the technology solution that they are demanding that actually solves their problems. We also found that it created a lot of empathy on the part of first of all, Japan's a nice place to live. People don't mind moving there. And because there was just more personal experience with what it's like, we're in the business of language upskilling for professionals. So now we've got a team of professionals who are also language upskilling themselves. And so I realized that while the platforms and services that are available now make it possible for a relatively small company to operate in many countries at once, and we're not anywhere near as big as an Emeritus or a Coursera, to really succeed in a target market. In our case, it's been critical to actually get closer to them. So even though we for several years have been doing AI-assisted personalization and had a solution that worked well in the Japan market, to really sell the hell out of this solution, we found that we needed to localize ourselves.
Yeah, Marni.
So I couldn't agree more with presence. But to your question specifically about Gen AI and globalization, I do an assessment as part of the problem space. Obviously, academic integrity is part of the complexity.
Absolutely.
Of how we build Gen AI capabilities into learning experiences, and it's really made very complex because we actually, as an industry, as a sector, are not super great at assessment anyway. Right? We have a few kinds of assessments that we rely on. There are a handful of objective assessment types and then a handful of performance-based assessment types that are primarily essay writing. And so it's going to force an absolutely, long overdue, in my opinion, digital transformation of assessment and learning experiences. One of the things that I'm most excited about, Coursera has announced a couple of things at Coursera conference around Gen AI, and we've been talking about these at several panels. But I'd just like to focus in on Marni Baker-Stein's thing that I'm super jazzed about, is the intersection of AR, VR, XR, and large language models like conversational pedagogy, so that you can create truly immersive experiences to build skills that have been pretty elusive in the online space, whether they're mechanical skills or whether they're sort of deep skills around managing teams or communication or clinical experiences. All of these things we've kind of sort of been able to do online and at scale, but now not only are we able to do them in a more, I think, engaging and immersive way that reaches a broader set of learners, but we can also add this conversational component to it that allows those learners to personalize those environments in ways that are purposeful and powerful for them, that I think is exciting.
Well, it seems that we have large data sets. I mean, in other industries, we talked about other industries in other ways. There are large data sets in education actually now because we've gotten more and more users online. Tapping into those data sets and then actually creating solutions based on that, I think is something that seems interesting. But Ashley, did you have something?
Yeah, just talking about assessment, and I agree that it's going to be disruptive for us as educators and teachers, but that's super exciting, right? Disruption is good. And so it's going to challenge us all to really cover all the Bloom's levels of outcomes and learning. And I think that maybe, traditionally we've not focused on all of them. Maybe we kind of hung out in the knowledge and understanding. So that's really going to get us to start thinking and really acting more on those higher levels. And there's all sorts of ways that we can do it in much more creative ways than the essay, right? So there's try it out, there's simulations. And the good news is our technology now is there, right? Before, like 10 years ago, maybe we didn't have the technology to do all of these kinds of activities online, but now we can, and we are doing it. And it's exciting at Emeritus when, in terms of the impact that we have, is 94% of our learners say that we have impacted themselves at work positively, so they've seen a positive impact. But this is the one that I get excited about, is 90% of them say they have impacted their organizations, right? So that's really about, hey, not only did I learn something, but I actually made a difference at work. So I changed my behavior, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we're all here about. We're here about changing behavior. So, yeah.
So we've talked about the positives of AI. What are the downsides in education for AI that you foresee right now?
I can jump in about
Please.
that. Although I'm really very enthusiastic about everything and echoing everything was said about that. Since we are speaking about global community, as we know, those language models are being trained on a very specific data set. So for instance, if you're going to do like a Googling the word CEO in Google Pictures, Google Images, you'll get a white male pictures with a suit. And if you're going to Google a basketball player, you're going to get an African-American players. And I think those cultural biases, in a way, make the AI-based solutions also culturally biased. And when trying to generate solutions for a different region in the world, I think it's a huge challenge that should be tackled.
And it goes back to our original point about how it could counter the original idea that we were talking about before, which is having localized solutions, right? Any other comments on kind of the potential dangers?
I totally agree with that. Obviously, there are obvious academic integrity issues. There are obvious IP complexities that really need to be resolved in a common way together. They need to be resolved together. It's like, but I think for me, the most worrisome thing about it to me is I think we will solve those questions. I think we'll be able to bound this Chat GPT or this generative AI, we'll be able to bound it in ways and train it in ways that will attend to bias issues, et cetera. I think we're going to be able to do that. What I worry about is it's basically putting a blast of a requirement to transform out into the educational ecosystem, which is going to cause some pretty serious change. And higher ed is not great at change. I mean, the internet was a similar blast, and we're still talking about online learning and how do we do it, and is it something that is good or not. And, we still have entire university systems who are deciding not to do online learning at all. And so I'm not even sure higher ed has 100% grappled with the information revolution that was caused by the interwebs, let alone this, which is a whole different level. And so how are we going to get to capability as a society in the US, across the world, that's going to allow our educational institutions to grapple with this change, support them as they grapple with this change, because it's going to be very transformative.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with what Marni is saying. Right now, I think it's time for us to get good use of those technologies, and we have seen it some use cases in many other industries. Education also, I'm sure everybody right now is at a pilot stage. I don't think we have. At least I'm not aware of anybody who has done a full-fledged rollout across all their products. As a consumer business, one of our biggest challenge has been assessment, that you put some kind of assessment, be it projects or whatever, and there's a general tendency in learners that not only they go and talk about their credential that, okay, I got certified by so-and-so in university, they go and put the entire assessment on the internet. So the next learner who's going to write the assessment or the project, the Google, okay, Simplilearn full stack program, this assessment answers, right? And there's quite likely that they might end up getting into one of these, so many different websites that exist, and just try to start from there rather than trying from scratch. Now, what this technology allows us to do, that, okay, I can personalize every assessment for everyone, right? So now suddenly that problem is gone of trying to do copying and whatnot. I'm sure many universities across the world are also struggling with the same problem. They make everybody go through the same standard assessment. Now the assessment can be completely personalized. So there are a lot of, when we start building a curriculum, we used to start from scratch. Now you don't have to start from scratch. You have this technology to give you a blueprint, and then you start adding components that you think make sense, add, delete, and so on. So right now I think it will take some time for us to really make best use of these technologies. And what are the shortfalls and negatives? I think more than the industry, I think the users will help us identify that, because they'll start using the same technology to game the system, and that's where we realize, okay, we need to do something else also.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's important, as with any new technology, to be aware of the potential pitfalls as we're building out on it, right? And I agree with you. We're very early innings in what is happening now. I mean, for sure. But it seems like things are speeding up in a manner that is, even with the internet, I think this is even faster in some ways than what happened with the internet. And so I think it's important to track the potential pitfalls.
Faster and way more disruptive.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely. So let's turn quickly to the economic crisis. We're trying to get all the topics in here, but the economic crisis, and how do you think that has affected students, their ability to focus on education at this time, and across the various levels, primary, secondary, university, lifelong learning. How is this economic crisis that we're going through right now as a global community really affecting education now? And, Avi, I don't know if you have a first thought on that.
Yeah, actually, I'm going back for what Marni said beforehand about COVID, and I think as we saw in COVID that there was a transition from schooling to learning. I think the same probably happens in this situation. We're much more accurate about learning process and less about being part of the organizational kind of ceremony. So I think in this sense it might be an accelerator for a positive outcome. I can say also from our perspective as an accelerator for startups that alongside with the downsides of it, we see now much more sane kind of valuations for companies and much more justified kind of investments that in the long run will generate better solutions as opposed to the bubble that we had 2 years ago.
And Frith, I think you had, ironically, a positive for this, right?
Yeah, a couple observations about that. First of all, one of the, I think, most exciting things about globalization is talent is global. And we not only provide a global solution, we hire a lot of talent globally. Some of the best people are findable on LinkedIn or Upwork, and my most recent hires have been in Vietnam, the Philippines, and Thailand, just because that's where I found the best talent. And Yes, so ironically, what the economic crisis meant for us is we were flooded with applicants from teachers wanting to teach for us because talent is global, and most of the people, we're a hybrid platform, so we are an AI assisted pedagogical program that includes a human in the loop, and we were able to hire some really great people because some other companies let them go.
But have any of you seen the negative aspect of this from the learner's perspective, just saying, look, I don't have the ability, the time, the money, whatever it is to...
I don't know if this is a negative.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's a negative for certain, but I think that what we've seen is learners in a time of uncertainty economically are looking for value. They understand across the world how much risk there is of spending a lot of money on something that you're not sure what the value of it is. And so recently, Coursera, we did a survey that's on Coursera blog around changing perspectives of learners and employers on micro-credentials. So they're looking for low-cost, industry-recognized and endorsed, short-form micro-credentials that have an explicit value against a job. Right. That's what people across the world, and this was a commonality, Australia, India, Turkey, US, South America, looking for more agile routes to value. And yeah, that doesn't mean they're not gonna ultimately get a degree, that doesn't mean they don't want that value to stack into more and more value over time, but they're looking for a lower cost, lower risk pathway to value that they can build upon. And I think that's become a global phenomenon that is going to be almost as disruptive as ChatGPT to higher education in the next decade.
And, you know, also just the notion that they are going out there and asking for these skills, right? So you said, oh, have people, just because of the uncertainty, have they kind of not been able to learn, or have they stopped learning? And I would say perhaps the opposite. Yeah. In times of uncertainty, people are looking for ways to secure themselves, to prepare themselves for the future, right? So we're seeing a lot of need for upskilling, and upskilling is really useful for organizations, not just from, hey, I'm going to update my workforce and transform them into the new roles, but there's a lot of psychological benefits, right? When you're learning, you have that sense of control, like I am taking control and empowering myself to become somebody updated. And so you not only get that, but if you do it in a cohort style learning, you'll get a lot of synergies and connections between the learners in the cohort. So a great thing to do in times of uncertainty.
I also want to add again one angle that during the COVID time, one of the things that I observed that the world is divided into two parts. There are like this whole knowledge workers who could work from their home, who can work remotely. Absolutely. And there are a lot of learners who simply couldn't do anything. The only reason they survived this 2 years because the governments were kind enough to give them enough to just have food. Now that also created this kind of realization that why should I be in that boat? How do I move from that to this world where I can work remotely, because such kind of things can happen anytime, anywhere. So that was the basic reality. What we also noticed during that time is that while a large part of the audience, a large part of the world is trying to see how do they survive hunger, homelessness, and just come out of this. And then we saw the other part only getting richer and richer because a lot of money chasing businesses who could operate online. So that was kind of a very, very shocking experience. And being at home, noticing at one day valuations are going like multiples and multiples, and then people dying of hunger, walking somewhere to get free food. And so I think that suddenly made this realization that everybody should be knowledge worker, everybody should get educated, and everybody should have an opportunity to decide whether they want to do that or they want to do this.
But then there's a question of access, right? Because not everyone has the access necessarily to do that, to have the opportunity.
I think, so Antonio, one of the best things that has happened because of this so much of money getting into EdTech in the last 2-3 years is that if you want to learn, anything and everything is available, and the good news is it's available for free. You need not take my paid program. Like if I have a Simplilearn onboards about 10,000 paid learners every month, I also enroll 150,000 free learners every month. Of course, there are differences between paid and free. Paid is like a free is that you have to put some extra work of learning on your own. On the paid side, you get the support and the infrastructure to make you become successful. Yeah. So that's the best part that I see. I also see that like some of the best companies in the world, let's say 20 years down the line, maybe the Googles of the world will come out of people who have self-taught themselves, have not taken any of our courses, not gone to any of the universities.
Mm-hmm.
Look, we're almost out of time, unfortunately, but because we could go on for a lot longer, I think. But let me ask each one of you to kind of close with your thoughts on kind of what is the future right now? What do we believe the future is? Especially, online education popularity is going up. Not sure what's going to happen with on-campus education as a result, right? And will that be the same in every market? So closing thoughts from each one of you on kind of that. Frith, I'll start with you since you're closest to me.
I've learned a lot from this panel. I'm super excited about lifelong learning and basically saying goodbye to the concept that when we finish our college education that we are done learning. That's what's really gratifying for me about running a global EdTech and working with professionals is that kind of to what you were saying, Ashley, people who are engaged on the learning edge they're much better employees, they're much happier human beings.
Ashley, any thoughts from you? We'll just go down the line and just with your thoughts.
Yes, I'm very excited about personalized learning. I remember when I was growing up, and still now, sometimes I'll get to that learning moment and I'm so frustrated, right? And it's so easy to give up and just put it aside. But I think the personalized learning will create a much smoother experience and less likely to have those moments of frustration because we're going to really, really work with the learner to be where they are at. So I'm very hopeful and excited about that. And I think generative AI tools, I only see net positive for the learner and for learners around the world and making education really that much better. So super excited.
Well, in a way I resonate with both of you, but I'll zoom out a little bit, and I think the biggest revolution of the 19th and 20th century was probably schools. I think the fact that we're taking for granted that most of the kids in the world are going to school is not trivial, and it really changed lives of millions of people. And I think the revolution of our time probably will be the agency and the fact that each learner can really direct his own learning, and this is as big as the first one.
Very interesting. Yeah?
So from my perspective, I think the biggest revolution that at least I am looking forward to, and I think that can be a big game changer, is that we start valuing skills more than degrees. Now today, going to an offline university is actually being part of a club. Now, which club you are part of depends upon which university you have gone to. So that takes precedence over any other thing. Whereas, time and again, at least I have seen, and I have seen data that skills always outrank degree when it comes to actual work performance. So will you get into a world, then suddenly we are talking about a very, very different world where you can get education right from maybe $10 to whatever you want to pay.
Does that doom the current university system?
I'm not sure. I'll not say doom because I'm sure universities have some of the smartest people working there. I think 10 years back, if you talk to any university that how do they look at online education, they will say it's a crap or they will not talk, right? 10 years in, see, every university is having some kind of online play. Either they're doing on their own or they're working with any of the partners. So at least they're open to it. Maybe some of these universities will decide that, look, I'll become completely online and do something else. So I think that this is just a matter of time. Finally, the economics drives everything, right? Yep. So if learners say that I want to value skill, not degree, the world will move in that direction.
Marni, your last thoughts?
I think that I'm trying to add on here, add some value here. I agree with everything that's been said. I love the direction. I think in the future, universities and in fact the entire educational infrastructure, which really did change a lot and was very positive in the industrial age, right? So into the future, I hope that our educational infrastructure will evolve to meet the needs of our time. become less of a sorting mechanism, which was so important in the industrial age, and become a mechanism to really bring value and purpose to everyone, one by one, with the new tools and technologies that we have available to support that kind of vision.
And it seems now that we can do this on a more global basis, as we were discussed today. So please join me in thanking me for the panelists who have had a great conversation today. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.